Good morning. Welcome to our program, Struggles of the Spirit. I'm the Reverend Leland Udell. I'm the director and host of this program. And today we are looking at Hinduism. We have been going over some of the major religions of the world, and today we have two guests. We have Dr. Michael Mcknight, who is Director of Media Services at the Medical Center, but his reason for being here is that he's also a professor in comparative religion and has a doctorate in the field and has traveled in India as well. And we have another guest, Maya Jarath. She is at the moment a medical student at the College of Medicine at the University of Vermont, and she is a native of India. And so she's going to help to keep us honest as we talk about Hinduism. So it will be sort of a three-way conversation today. So we'll do that for a half an hour, and then we will open up the phone to receive calls from you who are watching this as you think about Hinduism and its relationship to all of the religions of the world. It's an ancient religion. So maybe Michael, you and I might begin a little bit here. I said it's an ancient religion. How many years is it? Is it like Judaism, like 2,000 years before the time of Christ?
Well, actually, even earlier. I think Hinduism qualifies as the oldest continuously practiced religion that we have. And you can date it as far back as the Harappan civilization, which was in the Indus Valley about 2500 BC. This is a part of India that's now in Pakistan, where the Indus River flowed down. But they had quite a thriving civilization there that flourished between about 2500 BC and about 1800 BC, when the Aryan invasion took place. The Indo-Europeans swept down out of Central Asia. And really what we call Hinduism is an amalgam of the religious practices of the Indo-Europeans, the Aryans, and the indigenous population which was in India at that time. How old Hinduism actually is really anyone's guess, because it's not a religion that has a particular founder that you can trace and say, well, like with Buddhism, for example. We have the Buddha, we can date him 6th century BC, and we can say that Buddhism began with Siddhartha Gautama and the teachings of the Buddha. But Hinduism has had many outstanding teachers, but no one founding figure. And it's changed. It's like a river that's flowing through time with many different tributaries flowing into it, and it has yet to reach the sea. It's a long journey on Hinduism.
Well, what does it mean when we say that Buddhism has come out of Hinduism? Because it began in India, where Hinduism was being practiced? Is that what it means?
It's more than just geography, though. Actually, the Buddha based a lot of his teachings on the existing philosophy and religion. It would be correct almost to view at least early Buddhism as a branch, a radical branch of Hinduism.
Like early Christianity would be a branch of Judaism.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And there is the question, the same question that we asked with Jesus, we asked with the Buddha: did the founder really intend to found another religion as a rival to the original religion or not? Or rather, is there an attempt to reform the tradition? Because at the time of the Buddha, there was some feeling that Hinduism had become too priestly oriented, too much power was vested with the Brahmins, and sacrifice had become really the key element of the religion, which the Buddha objected to, as well as the caste system, the Varna Ashrama Dharma, the whole sociological structure of Hinduism, the Buddha critiqued. particularly the place of women in society. So I view the Buddha actually as a reformer of Hinduism rather than as a separate founder. But that's just my own view based on the studies that I've done. But actually, I think when we talk about Hinduism, we should speak of it in terms of what it calls itself, which is Sanatana Dharma, which is, Sanatana means eternal, and Dharma is a word that means many things, but quick translation would be religion or the law that upholds the universe. So when Hindus refer to their own tradition now, it is usually as Sanatana Dharma. Is that correct, Maya? Is that?
Well, I guess some people would, yeah. Just one thing, one point I want to make about Buddhism growing out of Hinduism is that it's interesting, but this is true actually of Sikhism as well, and several other religions that are practiced in India, that there are some Hindus that actually incorporate the Buddha as one of their gods, and it's a very inclusive religion, and so the link, I think, between Buddhism and Hinduism is pretty strong in that sense.
Going sort of both ways, then.
In some senses, yeah. The point is that the belief, I think, fundamental belief, at least the way I understand it about Hinduism, is that there is a supreme being, and all of the gods that we worship are manifestations of the supreme being. And so whether it be the Buddha, or it be Vishnu or Shiva or any other god, or even Jesus Christ, there are actually a lot of Christians in India, and Jesus Christ is some Hindus do worship him as God. So it's very inclusive.
You were saying, as we talked before we went on the air, that Hinduism is so multifaceted. It's hard in some ways to define.
I think that's true, and I think your description of it being a flowing river with lots of tributaries is a very nice description. That's pretty much how I view it, and that's why it's so hard to categorize what exactly a Hindu is, because there are so many people practicing it in so many different ways. There are no hard and fast rules that you have to follow to be considered a Hindu. At least I hope they're not, otherwise.
But people don't look at that multifaceted nature of Hinduism as in a negative way, like Christians might say, why can't we get together? We're so diverse, we splinter off, it's just terrible. Hindus don't worry about that, evidently.
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think that the fundamental philosophy really is one of being completely inclusive. You're not considered bad if you worship one particular god over another. So I mean, I think it would go against the grain of the religion to say that we all have to conform to one particular...
or should try to.
Or should try to, yeah.
Absolutely. There's a line from the Bhagavad Gita, I don't remember it exactly, but where Krishna is speaking, and he says to Arjuna, whichever way they worship me, it all comes to me. And that's the inclusive nature of Hinduism. Hinduism recognizes an incredible diversity, and not only among human beings, but just among all creation. And it's very inclusive in that respect. That's why it shocks a lot of people to see some of the avatars in Hinduism actually having like a lion's head like Narasimha, or a boar's head like one of the incarnations. But that's because it's all seen as sort of a universal storehouse of creation, all of it, all together. And that's what I find exciting about Hinduism. It's and also hard to pin down, a little bit frustrating. When I went to India years ago, I sort of was trying to look around for it and discovered it everywhere, in the streets and in the temples and in people's homes. It's not a segmented religion that you can say, well, now we're going to go to the central locus of Hinduism. Like with Roman Catholicism, it would clearly be the Vatican and the Pope, and there's an authority there that when the Pope speaks, it's with an infallible voice on theological matters. There is no similar being in Hinduism that I'm aware of, and so that makes it a little bit harder to pin down, but also very fascinating for the student of religion. You can find everything under one roof there, just about.
The sacred scriptures, you mentioned Bhagavad Gita, is That is the sacred scripture for Hindu or
do you want to talk about the sacred scriptures just for a second?
Sure.
Because the Aryans, when they came down, the Indo-Europeans, brought with them the basic texts that are called the Vedas, and these are sort of a compendium
Veda
of...
or Beta?
No, Vedas, V-E-D-A-S.
Yes.
It comes from the root vid, which actually means to see, and it's the same root that our word video comes from. So the Vedas are what was seen by rishis or seers who had a correct view of reality. It's called Shruti, which would mean that which is direct. It's a direct revelation. Now, there are 4 basic Vedas, and these are very old, dating back, some of them as far as 1500 BC. Hard to date, again, because it was an oral tradition. And then appended to them are sort of commentaries, like the Upanishads, which date back to maybe 800 BC or thereabouts. And there are 108 Upanishads, so there are quite a few of those. And then the door of that revelation was closed. That's the Vedic corpus, if you will. I'm leaving some out, but I don't want to go into a lecture here. And then after that, the epic period came, and you have the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and these fantastic poems, very long, 100,000 verses, 24,000 verses, like that, equivalent to like the Encyclopedia Britannica if you put them all in books. And part of that corpus in the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita dates from about 2nd century BC, about, again, hard to date. And it, if anything, is like the New Testament in Hinduism, which nothing really is, but if anything has that sort of role as a short scripture that epitomizes the teachings, I would say the Bhagavad Gita is it. It was like Mahatma Gandhi's favorite text. It's only 701 verses, so compared to 100,000 verses, you've got 700 verses, and it's a distillation of all of the key philosophies in particularly the Upanishads. And it's put into a almost a play-like atmosphere. It's a dialogue between basically God and a devotee, and the devotee's having a crisis of confidence at the time. Concerns a battle, but it also concerns life itself. You know, do I take an active role, or do I just drop everything and retreat to the mountains? And Krishna is saying to that devotee, no, get out there, you know, do your best. It's a very activistic approach there, because it's all on a cosmic scale, and the souls that you see, the universal self, cannot be destroyed in battle. So therefore, pursue it. Right? Is that sort of the gist of it?
That is right.
Yeah. You would agree with that?
Definitely. And the other thing I think that's kind of interesting is you mentioned the Ramayana, and one of the nice things, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are essentially mythological epics, and so they make a nice story on top of everything else. And the Ramayana is actually the basis for a lot of our festivals. And it's essentially a story of the triumph of good over evil. And so, you know, it provides that inherent philosophy that good is good and that it will triumph over evil eventually. So.
And these epics are actually acted out in the streets at festival time. Particularly the story of Rama, who is an ideal king, and Sita, who is his wife, who is lost or abducted by an evil demon. And but any of these stories take multiple different turns. They're like a warehouse almost, where deliveries have been made over centuries of stories that have been deposited, and they're all included. Again, the epics are sort of like Hinduism itself, as a compendium of all sorts of different beliefs and stories.
It's a melting pot, Hinduism, really.
Absolutely.
It is. Yeah, there's so much layered on top of another layer, and it keeps going, keeps growing, and that's why you have different people practicing it in such completely different ways, and because it depends on what layer you're on.
Now, Jews historically feel that they brought monotheism, the worship of one God. Now, I don't know if other religious groups would agree with that, but that is something that is often claimed. There's only one God, not a plurality of gods. Now, does the Hindu really think that there are a multitude of gods, or would they say those multitude of gods are really manifestations of the one God?
Well, maybe you'd like to address that, but I just want to say one thing about it, that I think that, it's hard for me to say what the average person believes in terms of how many gods there are. I know that many families in India, worship one particular, what I would call a manifestation. Some people are devotees of Ganesh, some are devotees of Krishna, and some of Vishnu. They all have their own family god, so to speak, that they worship. And so, I don't know whether they really believe that theirs is one of many, or if this one person this one god is a manifestation of another one. But the way I understand it, I can tell you that, is that like I said before, that there is a supreme being, which sometimes is referred to as Om, which is in many of our prayers, a very common word that's used. It's
How would you spell that in English?
O-M.
O-M, okay.
Yeah, and it's...
that's where the omnipade...
Yeah, exactly. It's used in a lot of places, and it's part of a lot of prayers. And it's a supreme being, and the supreme being is sort of, it's hard to fathom something that is amorphous, just a supreme being. So to give it more structure, it was sort of expressed as a trinity of gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, which is the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer. And they were meant to represent a cycle, because you can't have creation without destruction. That was the belief. So it was an endless cycle. And then you have other gods that are forms of Vishnu or of Shiva. And so, I really don't think that, people will say that there are really these multiple gods. Certainly in terms of their day-to-day life, they refer to them by all different names, and they may worship one throughout their whole life. But I think they all link back to the same one supreme being.
That's interesting. Michael, you have some comment about that?
No, I was just listening to Maya speak. That's very well said. And remember, she said she wasn't going to say anything at the beginning of the program, and you said to give her an opportunity. Well, Vedanta philosophy, which comes out of the Upanishads and really goes back to the ancient teachings, talks about two levels of Brahman. Brahman being the absolute, which is epitomized in the mantra Om, and Nirguna Brahman is without qualities, which would be very hard for the human mind to visualize, just like we'd have difficulty visualizing a vacuum, or like a screen that is the background for all creation, but is more than just the background, because it's the emanating factor for all creation. So knowing that this is a very hard thing to fixate on, the sages recognize that Brahman has manifestations, which they call saguna, or with qualities. And so when you put qualities on that, basically ineffable essence, then it becomes the multiple gods.
Okay.
And so some people may believe that their particular deity, whether it's Ganesh or whatever, is it. That's fine. As I say, all worship flows the same anyway. So it's really a way of conceptualizing that which is inconceivable for the human mind. And I'm comfortable with that. So when people say, is Hinduism monotheistic, I would say, well, how do you define monotheism? If it's more like monism, really, or pantheism, and that is recognition of the universal presence of the deity throughout all creation.
Right.
And
but I think in pantheism, God, if we use that word, only exists in the natural world. It doesn't exist outside of that natural created world.
So that's the ancient question about the transcendence of the deity versus the immanence of the deity.
Right.
Well, if you can have it both ways, that's the way it is.
Right.
I think that question is a kind of a false dichotomy, really. And when I say pantheism, pan means everywhere, and theism would mean God everywhere-ism, if you will. What's weak in Hinduism, and justifiably so, is the question of evil side of that. Like we have a fairly strong, in Western traditions, view that of the reality of Satan, for example, and that's sort of negative pole of the positive. But when you're in a monistic environment, then evil really becomes more a matter of ignorance rather than a force of evil, if you will, that we're fleeing from or trying to preserve ourselves from. Yeah.
Do you want to say a little more about that? I'm not fully clear as to what you're saying about.
Well, if you take a philosophy that is all-inclusive, such as the way we've been describing Hinduism, and oppose it to a dualistic philosophy where you have good and evil poles, which actually in Western tradition is present there, from the Zoroastrian tradition all the way down through Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. You don't have that. There is for example, a figure called Mara in Buddhism, who is a great tempter and distractor of the Buddha, and kind of represents worldly temptations, if you will. But he's not like Satan in the sense of being a
very powerful
evil force. It's more like the Greek philosophers like Socrates, who said that really when people do wrong, it's brought about through ignorance of the good. So the whole experience of being a human being is sort of an educational process that we're learning to distinguish the innate good that's here and move away from the dross or the evil that, or almost the evil in quotes. I don't know.
That's a really interesting. I'd never thought of that. That's a really interesting point. That there really is no concept of a devil or something that you have to fear. What you do in life is measured sort of against what the best that you could do. So you're sort of competing against yourself. You're trying to do what you have to do and do it the best way possible. So it's very much focused on you yourself.
Exactly.
That's definitely that's interesting. I'd never thought about that before. That's true.
It goes back to that term dharma, which is always at the forefront, and each person has their own, it's called swadharma, their own path, which is related to their birth status, who they are, who their parents are, what their job is, and stuff like that. But what is right for me might not be right for you. And that's really the key, is understanding what's right.
And that's probably what allows the religion to be inclusive. Going back to what you were saying before about, is there a feeling that everyone should come together and there should be one form of worship, and exactly that point, the point that everyone has their own dharma, or their own path to follow, and a complete acceptance of the fact that that path might be completely different for two different people.
Does that position sort of flow out of an understanding of reincarnation?
I guess they are related. I think you could understand the concept of dharma and your path in life independent of reincarnation, but certainly reincarnation could figure in there, because there is a feeling that you are born again and again until you achieve moksha or nirvana, which is basically a sort of a union with God, or the Supreme Being, when you become one with God.
That would be a Hindu belief.
Right, essentially, yeah. Now, again, I couldn't tell you if this is something that's actually written in the Vedas or not. I really don't know.
But it's practiced.
But I think it's a pretty universally held belief.
Well, if you think about the whole problem of why do the righteous suffer, which is Christians and Jews often worry about that a lot, ultimately, you have to say, well, we don't really understand. Job, the book of Job, tries to deal with it in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, and it doesn't really get neatly answered there either. And if you have a doctrine that you believe like reincarnation, it's very neatly answered there, because whatever horrible thing you do to people in this life, well, in your next life, you're going to see things differently as a result of it, where you're born, what the circumstances are. Would that be true from?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think so. I think that's a
much more just view of how we treat each other, and that justice is finally meted out,
yeah.
but it may take some
a
centuries
few births, yeah.
or more, you know. Michael, you have any thoughts about that?
Well, the doctrine of karma is one we really haven't talked about, and that relates to both reincarnation and why do the righteous suffer as well. Karma is really any action that you take. It's not a very mysterious concept in that there is a balancing out of as you sow, so shall ye reap, that type of thing. It's the fundamental concept of karma, I think. But the difference there in a doctrine of reincarnation is that you come into life with a certain karmic load, if you will, and this is different for each person. The soul itself, the Atman, or the inner being, cannot be destroyed, as we said before.
Immortal soul.
Immortal soul. You know, it brings to mind, you know, Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, was a big student of Hindu philosophy, the New England Transcendentalist. And he wrote a little poem called Brahma, which was based, he had read the Bhagavad Gita, and he tried to summarize it in a little poem. And I don't remember all of it, but it starts, if the red slayer thinks he slays, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways. I keep, I pass, I turn again. Far and forgot to me is near. Shadow and sunlight are the same. The vanished gods to me appear, and one to me are shame and fame. They reckon ill who leave me out. When me they fly, I am the wings. I am the doubter and the doubt. I am the hymn the Brahmin sings.
I remember that now. You have a great memory.
Yeah.
I couldn't repeat
Well, no,
it.
that's it, all but the last verse. The gods pine in vain for my abode, and pine in vain the sacred seven. But thou, meek lover of the good, find me and turn thy back on heaven, is the last line. It's a difficult poem to understand, but in the context of an indestructible spirit that's going through multiple manifestations, as we all are. In a sense, we're all one, but we're all different, you know, at the same time. We're all unique individuals, but we're all, it's like electrical energy. We're all like light bulbs, and the energy that's flowing through us is coming from a common source, a universal conscious generator, if you will. Individual light bulbs blow out all the time, and some are brighter than others. Some people function at a nightlight level, and some are like a floodlight in there, and they burn out fast, sometimes like stars. You know, the brighter stars burn out faster. But the idea that we're all drawing from a common energy reservoir, I think, is scientifically true. You know, this is where science and religion actually come together. And Hinduism has no problems with the findings of science. Never has. Whole question of evolution, that doesn't bother Hinduism. The whole question of, you know, ultimate ground of being that physicists are searching for, that doesn't bother Hinduism, because that's Brahman. They're looking to try to define the undefinable. So I don't know, that poem just popped into mind, and I like it. Obviously, if I memorized it, I must like it. You know. So.
Yeah.
Maya, do you have any comments about that?
No, I think that's very true. What you say is really true. I mean, I think the reason that Hinduism has no problem with science and things like that is because there's so little that's formalized in the first place that it's it's very hard to do something or believe something that goes against Hinduism, because there's so little formal definition of what you have to do, what you have to believe, or the way you have to behave to be a Hindu. Although there's a lot associated in people's minds, but it's none of it is written in stone.
I was going to say, with the possible exception of the caste system, though, because that's the system that I know is not. In fact, I'd be interested in your views on that, because on paper, at least, it doesn't exist, but it certainly does exist as a practice. Right?
Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I don't think I could say that it would be wrong to say it doesn't exist, but I do know that it's not something which we like to think exists in the sense that it's not a law anywhere. It's more of a cultural thing. I think the way I think of the caste system is it's cultural, and in fact I think that its linkage with Hinduism has to do with its influence from the culture. Since Hinduism is an amalgam, and it has evolved since it began, taking on things from society and from the way people practiced it. I think that I could be wrong completely, but this is what I like to believe, that it's not really. I don't think you could say that caste system is something which has been defined in Hinduism. I think it's come to be linked with Hinduism because it's something that came about in India, which is where Hinduism was being practiced. And what the caste system essentially does is define your role in society based on the job that you do. And it's actually, obviously it's not a particularly good thing to tell somebody that you have to be stuck in a particular role your entire life. But in terms of defining, categorizing people and sort of saying that these are the roles you have to play that are based on the jobs that you do, it makes for a more simple approach to life. And say, you are the people who are going to help us worship you and be our teachers. You are the people who are going to be our warriors. You are going to be the tradespeople. It just sort of gives you a role to play. It's like any stratification of society, which comes about just with time. And I think it was an attempt to simplify that.
How about arranged marriages?
Well, again, that's something that's completely cultural. I don't think that has anything to do with Hinduism at all.
That happens in other non-Hindu countries, I think, as well, doesn't it?
I'm quite sure it does, yeah. And so it has no linkage with Hinduism. It's one of those things which came about culturally as providing a structured way to approach a difficult topic, and I think that's what it is. And it does still go on in India, and I think that it has a lot of very sound basis when you think about it. When think about the fact that very often when you're wanting to get married, you're of marriageable age, you don't necessarily have the bigger picture. You don't necessarily know what's best for you. And what it is I think an attempt to say that your family knows you best, knows what life is all about, and they have it's sort of like making a sound decision as opposed to one based on the brain rather than the heart. I think that's what it's for. Obviously it has a lot of, again, it can be distorted and made very bad, but the fundamental basis for it, I think, is very sound.
And the divorce rate in India is very low compared to the West. A Hindu friend of mine said, in the West you fall in love and get married, and in India we get married and then we fall in love, which I thought was a beautiful way to put it.
It's true from what I've heard. Yeah. Well, in some ways, could you say that the caste system comes out of a whole understanding of reincarnation, that it's sort of a codification of
I would say it's related. Again, it's a related concept, but it also people wonder, well, how can, let's say somebody is not very high in the caste system and their lot is very low, how can they be so happy? Because the strange thing for a Westerner visiting India is the general happiness of the people. And I say that, particularly in village India, I saw it. I mean, situations that for Westerners would be virtually intolerable or would cause us a lot of pain don't seem to bother them, and I feel like part of that is the view that this particular incarnation is just one in many, and that as I perform my service in this life, because there are many different duties and obligations depending not only on the person's job but also on the stage in life. What's the responsibility of a student is different than a householder, is different than somebody who's retired, and that's very clear. So the last stage of life is not a throwaway stage at all. It's the stage of real achievement, I think, and we don't see that so much, but that contributes to the general well-being, psychological well-being of Hinduism.
That's something I was going to raise as well. That just like you have the caste system, which tells you what your role in society is. There's also in Hinduism a concept of, again, it's not something I think which is practiced that formally, but traditionally there has been a belief that there is a time in your life to play different roles. There's a time when you're a student, and that should be the focus of your life. And then there's a time when your duty is to your family, and then there's a time when your duty is a sannyasi, is to basically reflect on life and meditate. And these are the three stages you go through, and basically it allows you to focus your energies on what is the most important task for you. And obviously they come in that sequence. You start off being a student when you're young, and then once you get married, then you have responsibility to your family.
And there's a sense of closure at the different phases of your life, which sometimes in the West, not to be critical of the West, but we have this incredible youth culture here, where people, although they're, I don't know, however, 60 years old, still want to be teenagers, and that's okay, and in a way it's kind of charming, but in another way, the real business of life, if the real business of life is finding out who we are and what we're doing here, then they need to get on with that business. And one of the clues is actually a physiological clue. When you start to get gray hair, you're supposed to concentrate on that and pull back from life a little bit.
That's a sign, an
not to go
indication.
for the hair dye and cover it up, but that's actually a sign of increasing, or should be a sign of increasing wisdom. And in the ideal lifespan, at the end of life, you've achieved really the reason for being here. The schoolhouse closes up, you graduate, you move on. And it's kind of a nice concept there.
Yeah, I mean, I think both systems offer you an advantage. I see, you know, in this country, for example, one thing that's really nice is that even at the age of 50, you can go back to school and study. And that's very nice to know that if you missed the opportunity earlier on, it's not that, you know, that's it for the rest of your life. You actually have the opportunity to go back. This is just another approach to it, which says that, you know, for everybody, there are phases, and if you should, you know, it's also true that it's hard as, well, maybe not a 50-year-old, but a 40-year-old, it is hard to be in school, because usually you have a family at that time, and you feel you're torn in many different ways. And so there are advantages and disadvantages. It's nice because you have the opportunity, but it's, you know, it's also harder on you.
That's right. Oh, yes. So. More responsibilities.
Yeah.
At this point, I should invite the viewer to phone in. The phone number is on the screen, and we really await you eagerly. Last week we had several callers, and we invite our callers to join us here and visibly to sit with us. You don't have to just phone in because you want to ask a technical question. You can phone in because you want to just talk with us.
There is a call, Lee.
There is a call?
Yeah.
Okay.
And our first caller is?
Our first caller is. Okay, welcome.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I've called you in the past before. I've always enjoyed your show.
Thank you very much.
Well, I thought of a comment here, you know, when we're discussing about the different ways of looking at, you know, whether we call it God or not, what the universal being would be. I always thought of it as what is, and what is the sum of all its parts. So I would say that would be welcomed within our existence, to have all these different views and different ways of looking at things. And I just want to say, like, it's, you know, like we tend to, between different religions, seem to want to say that ours is right and the other one is wrong. But I think it's the sum of all its parts is basically the philosophy I like to think of now, simplistic why. And like the rivers and the arteries, the pool, of going back out to recirculate, basically, that's, you know, the legal I have. So I appreciate that interpretation of it. So I think, you know, what we have is, in human existence, we'll have our opinions of what is and what's not. But I believe this is all the diversity that we have, and what is will be is, and, you know, in spite of all this anyway. So what's out there will be whatever is, in spite of our opinions of it, basically. But I think it's the diversity of it is needed. As, you know, there are different flowers in the garden. There's different species on Earth. It's all part of our existence. I just want to leave that at that.
Beg your pardon?
I just want to leave that comment.
Yes.
Well, thanks very much.
Well, you're very welcome. Does either of you want to make a comment about what our caller had to say? Rather affirmative, I think, sir.
Well, I just want to make one other comment about the caste system. Like, we have relatives in Mexico, and Mexico has a bit of that caste system as far as that's concerned. I have, you know, agreement with the overall have boards in between each other, and you're not standing on each other's heads, if you get my my symbolization of that. So I think that would be fine, and I understand being perfectly happy in a situation when you have a simplistic life as far as not having a lot of possessions and all that. And I've been in times in my life where I've had practically nothing, and I'm perfectly happy. But there's other times when you do look up and you say, well, hey, why am I here and why is that person up there? So I just wanted to add that to that comment, and I'll let you go. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this gentleman we're off that connection, but he's still watching us, I assume. So is there anything you want to reflect upon?
Not particularly. One concept, I don't know if this relates to that, but it does relate to your name, and that is the concept of illusion that pops up in Hinduism. The Sanskrit word is Maya for illusion, and this is frequently misunderstood by students just looking at Hinduism at first, saying that what we perceive in the world is an illusion. Because the word Maya itself goes back to Sanskrit word which means to measure, and that everything that is measurable or felt with the senses is really Maya. And the reason it is viewed as an illusion is that it's not permanent. And that which is permanent in the universe is this Brahman, or whatever we want to call. So in a sense, everything that passes through existence, like these very chairs that we're in the studio that we're in right now, seems to be so permanent for the moment, but in fact we know it wasn't here just a few years ago and probably won't be here. There might be a high-rise built on this spot, and its stuff passes through existence like that. And because it's impermanent, you don't want to build your house on the wrong foundation, and a lot of people have built a house on an impermanent foundation. So I would see Hinduism as a quest for the real. And actually that goes back, what pops into my mind is a hymn from the Rig Veda, and the central line is, from the unreal lead me to the real. And from Maya, or from the illusory reality, it's still real. Like if I went out and hit my head into a tree, it would hurt. It doesn't mean that there's just an illusion of a tree there, but the tree is not always there. You see what I mean?
Yes.
That's actually, the word Maya is also used interchangeably for wealth in India. And that's for the same reason that, wealth is an illusion, in the sense that, sure, it makes your life more comfortable, but it's not something which you're going to take with you.
Particularly if your wealth is in the stock market. That's very appropriate. Here today, and who knows? So
your name has a lot of meaning to it.
Yeah, it does.
Rich kind of meaning.
It does.
I was reflecting upon our gentleman caller, and I appreciate his interest in watching our series. From my point of view, I would say it's hard to say who's right and who's wrong about world religions, or any point of view, ethically even. But I think one has to, for oneself, make a choice, or try to make a choice anyway, without necessarily judging other people's choices as wrong. In the Christian practice, Jesus says, only God is in the judgment seat, no one else. And so ultimately, that's not our place to say someone else is wrong, or some other religion is really wrong. All we can do is to pursue what we feel is true within us, as long as we don't violate other people.
It's true.
As you said, it all flows back to the same place. I think that's the best way of looking at it, that no matter what path you take,
And actually, in talking about Hinduism, we should state that Hinduism is really not out to make converts. It's not a proselytizing religion. In fact, the quickest definition of a Hindu is someone whose parents are Hindus. It sounds almost like a silly definition, but I'm sure your parents are Hindus. My parents are not. I could not convert to Hinduism. Despite what the Krishna consciousness people, there was sort of this fad with Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta a few years ago, and it's still going on now, where a lot of Westerners took names like Govinda and stuff and started to chant Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, and I have a lot of sympathy for them. They were seeking something, but the very fact of pretending to be Hindus doesn't make them into Hindus, I don't think, by my understanding of Hinduism anyway. So while I'm very sympathetic to Hindu philosophy and stuff, I would not consider myself, or that's why I thought it was odd that I'm invited today on this program, because I can't really even represent it. But
it's interesting. There is, I think, no real. I mean, there on the internet. You can nowadays there are these pages that you can log on to, which say to become a Hindu, click here, and you can. And they supposedly send you out a little certificate saying that you are now a Hindu. I mean, there is no way to convert to Hinduism. But on the other hand, there's also no definition. There's no card that Hindus carry that say they are. And so, if somebody wanted to be a Hindu tomorrow, I mean, you can believe in it and you can follow its rituals, and there's no one who's going to stop you. So, you know, while there's no formal way to convert into it, there's nothing stopping you from considering yourself a Hindu, in a sense.
So there's no mandate to have converts to...
No, and nobody is stopped from entering a temple. Nobody is stopped from conducting the rituals. I mean, if you wanted to do it, you could.
Are there clergy of some sort, professional religious people?
Yeah, they're pundits who, you know, are...
What are they called?
They're called pundits.
Pundits.
Yeah, the word's actually used in English. They
Yes.
talk about the pundit, you know, yeah, so
A
it's...
negative way, though.
yeah.
Nah, well, I think it's used in English to mean learned, someone who's
Okay,
learned,
maybe,
or,
yeah.
you know, yeah. But they are the people who are schooled in the scriptures and in the rituals and speak Sanskrit, or at least they can recite all the hymns.
There are Hindu services on special festivals.
Yeah, there are rituals that you follow at the time of birth and the time of death, particularly at the time of death, and marriage. But again, there are many different ways you can get married. I mean, there are different, not sects, but there are different beliefs in Hinduism. So some marriage ceremonies take 3 hours and others take half an hour.
Okay.
But they're all considered Hindu ceremonies.
And one big difference in worship, in rituals, is when you go to a Hindu temple, it's more of a solitary pilgrimage rather than a communal event as it is in Christianity and Islam, and for that matter in Judaism. You won't find at least I didn't find a service where people come together, and what comes to mind, we had the good fortune of visiting an ancient site called Khajuraho in central India, where there are magnificent temples that are just out in this field that were built about 900 AD by a dynasty long since gone. And we pulled into Khajuraho at night and couldn't see anything, and at dawn I got up in the little hotel where we were staying and looked out in the mist of the dawn. I saw probably a dozen of these huge temples that were they'd almost look like they were moving across the landscape. And I went, they're famous for their erotic sculpture as well. Khajuraho has an incredible variety of sculpture on the temples. But when you ascend, you go up a steep stairway and actually enter into the temple itself. You're entering a very dark chamber, as if you're going into a cave. And the Sanctum Sanctorum is really lit only by light coming in from the outside. So you almost feel as if you're leaving the ordinary world and entering into a very special space there. And that is a real contrast with, because although those are not active temples, they were at one time. That was a very sacred center at one time. And I found it to be a profoundly moving experience. Even as a Westerner visiting there, I felt that I was moving into sacred space and time that was definitely different.
Do you take your shoes off, or you put something on your head, or is there any outward sign, that, you know, like if you're a Muslim, there are signs like that? And
Well, the shoes off.
You do take your shoes off. It's a sign of respect. So you definitely would do that. But it's an important point, I think, that, you know, Hinduism really is a very individual religion. I think that, you know, that's part of what allows everyone to practice it their own way. That, you know, many Hindus don't go to temples ever. Or if they go, they'll go for a particular event, maybe when somebody dies, or when there's some particular good news that they want to celebrate, or for some reason.
And that wouldn't be considered bad?
That's not bad at all, no. Everyone, you seek God yourself. I mean, you have your own individual prayers, and what you say is also different. There's no fixed thing that you have to recite or that you have to say. There are prayers that people commonly say. Certainly the ones that are performed in these ritualized ceremonies, like at marriages and deaths, there are. But
every day,
as an individual person, you wouldn't recite them. That's something that the Pandit does for you. You make your own communication with
Although
God.
there is the Gayatri.
Mantra.
There's a little phrase, actually it's from the Vedas, that I heard very often in the morning there. I'm going to actually try to say it. It goes something like, Om Bhu Bhwa Swa Tat Savitur Veneryam Bhargo Devasa Dhimahi Yo Yo Napachogya. How was that?
It's pretty good.
Pretty close. Yeah. And that is a salutation to the sun and to the universe around. It begins with that mantra Om, which is really a great acceptance. I accept all that I see, and may all this stimulate my mind towards enlightenment today, or roughly. That's what, it's a very hard one to translate. Yeah. And that's said usually at dawn. Dawn is a very special time, actually, and all the Hindus that I saw there were up at dawn. They're not late sleepers there in India, because it's that very special time, and that's a salutation that you hear. It's not a prayer exactly. It's more of a greeting.
A chant, or I guess.
Do you pray directly to God, like, God, I love you, help me to love you too, help me to live in this life the way you would have me live? Do people who are Hindus have that kind of prayer, addressing God?
They do address God. I don't know whether they say, God, I love you. It's actually, this whole thing of saying I love you is not very common in India altogether. It's not something
That's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
so
it's interesting.
But you certainly, you ask for God's blessing. And you ask for God to look after you, to guide you on the right path, to give you wisdom. I think that's a very important one. Essentially, those are the kind of things you ask for.
Why would the word love, I mean, it has so many meanings in English, but if God, I love you, why would that not be the typical for a Hindu? Do you have any idea, either of you? I'm curious.
I don't know if you have...
Well, the term bhakti, or devotion, is definitely there.
Yeah.
And that could be roughly translated as love.
I guess so, maybe.
I don't know. One thing popped into mind when you were talking about prayer, and it's a word that has entered the English language that we haven't really talked about, and that's yoga. And yoga is, we see yoga on television a lot, and
that's right.
It's exercises. But actually, yoga is a whole discipline to bring one closer to that ineffable essence. And in the highest form of that experience, it's really beyond words. That is, the knower and the known have become the same. There's no difference, and because there really isn't a difference. And so to put words between the two is that degree of difference away from the goal. So meditation is, I view, and this actually comes out of Vedanta philosophy and the Bhagavad Gita too. The Bhagavad Gita is like a little text about meditation, particularly chapter 4 in there, talking about how to find a right spot to sit down and think. And the highest form of meditation, again, I'm not speaking from experience here, but a little bit of practice, is nonverbal. So the actual chatter of the mind is stilled. Not that you banish it with a vengeance, because that'll never work. It'll come back and strike back. But rather that it just moves aside, and the experience itself is there.
More like contemplation than Christian tradition.
Exactly. And there's a great unity among mystical traditions. If you're starting to talk mystical traditions, East and West, and many scholars have pointed this out, they're really talking about the same thing. And you can take a passage from Meister Eckhart in the 13th century from Europe and compare it to Shankara in the 9th century in India, and it's the same basic thing. I mean, I think. They're really talking about an experience of the divine. that's accessible to all of us, I believe, but is normally out of our purview because we concentrate our mental energies elsewhere. Like Wordsworth said, getting and spending we lay waste our powers, little we see in nature that is ours. I've got tons of poetry I could recite.
I feel we're just warming up to the subject. I'm shocked to realize we only have 5 minutes left. Do you? I'd like to invite people to sum up. We have a little time here for that. 4 minutes.
I'm glad that Maya's spoken so much because she's added a great deal to this conversation. I think that's essential, and I truly think that what we've given here today, although it's a fleeting picture, and you might say a thumbnail sketch, is really an accurate depiction, as far as I can tell, of the role of Hinduism within the world's religions. It is unique. It is the oldest continuously practiced religious tradition. It shows no sign of abatement. That is, it's going to continue as long as there are people on the Indian subcontinent, and there are plenty of people on the Indian subcontinent, so it's growing in that sense exponentially. And I think it really has a place at the table of world religions, bringing a link to a primordial, a very earlier tradition that is still very applicable today. The practices in Hinduism work today as they did centuries ago. So I truly believe that as I said, the analogy is a river. It's flowing through now, and it's going to continue to flow into the future, and I'm glad of it.
Yeah. I think that the key is that Hinduism is really a very loose religion, very unstructured, inclusive, and you know.
Do we have a question? No. I mean, excuse me. Do we have another?
And so I think it allows for wide variety in the way it's practiced, which I think comes from its very, very strong ties to the culture, and just the duration of time that it's been around for, which has allowed it to be changed in so many different ways.
Yes.
You know, I think.
And for a student of mythology, I'm sort of a student of mythology, it's like a treasure trove. It's like you get into a Fort Knox, the mythological equivalent of Fort Knox, because there's so much in terms of legend. That's the way the tradition was really passed down traditionally, was through stories and legends, and they've been preserved to a large extent. And song and dance, we didn't really mention that, but Hinduism is expressed beautifully in the arts, sculpture and dance and music. Terrifically rich culture there.
While we're still on the air, I want to thank you both for being here, for you daring to come and to talk, and for you to backing me up. And I think it's the best of all possible worlds to have you both here today. And I really enjoyed it. I was shocked to realize our time was about gone. So,
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And it's been really important. When I was in seminary, I had a course in the Bhagavad Gita, a whole semester course.
Oh, really?
I went to Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and they had a course like that, and I really enjoyed it, and I found it really helpful. So sometimes there are Christian institutions that recognize there are other religions in the world, but I think that's the only seminary I know of that did that. I hope that our viewers enjoyed today, and will continue to tune in to our channel.